Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Elijah, and I'm a 43-year-old businessman. I've built a life I was proud of, a beautiful wife, Ella, and a close-knit family, including my son Jackson. And then there's Damien, a friend I trusted like a brother. I thought we had it all, but it turns out I was living a lie. This started about a year ago when Ella told me she wasn't feeling well. She'd been tired and moody, so when she broke down crying one night and told me she'd been diagnosed with cancer, I was devastated. I hugged her, held her, and promised I'd do everything to support her. I told her I'd move heaven and earth if that's what it took. Damien was one of the first people I told. He said all the right things, how he was there for us, how we were family. He even cried when I told him. He became our rock during Ella's treatment. He went with me to her appointments when I couldn't, reassured me when I felt overwhelmed, and always told me how much Ella loved me for standing by her. The medical bills piled up fast. Ella's treatments were experimental, and insurance didn't cover much. She said she didn't want to put her health at risk by delaying anything, so I paid. Between her sobs, she'd tell me how guilty she felt about the strain on our finances, but I always told her, money doesn't matter. I just want you to be okay. What I didn't realize at the time was how much money mattered to her, and to Damien. It wasn't just the medical bills. Ella and Damien convinced me to sell some of my investments to fund a trip Ella wanted to take. A bucket list, she called it. She and Jackson planned everything, flights, hotels, even a week-long stay at a spa. Damien told me it was exactly what she needed to stay strong, and I didn't hesitate. But I stayed home to keep the business running and make sure there was still a roof over our heads. Looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. It was the little things that started gnawing at me, small inconsistencies in their stories, Ella's sudden changes in mood when I asked about her treatments, and the way Damien started acting almost possessive of my time with her. But I pushed the doubts down. I thought it was just the stress of everything. After all, who questions a woman fighting cancer? But then something happened that flipped my entire world upside down. About 6 months into Ella's supposed treatments, something didn't sit right. She had started to look healthier, not worse. Now, I'm no doctor, but I knew enough to expect weight loss, fatigue, maybe even hair thinning. But Ella was glowing. Her appetite was back, she was taking yoga classes with her friends, and she suddenly had all this energy. "It's the new meds," she'd say when I asked, always brushing it off with a laugh. Damien, of course, backed her up every time. "It's a miracle, Eli," he'd tell me. "She's responding better than anyone expected. Isn't that amazing?" He'd say it with this big grin, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off. Then there was Jackson. My son's always been a bit standoffish, but he became almost hostile during this time. If I asked about Ella's day, he'd roll his eyes and mutter, "Why do you even care? You're too busy working." He spent more time out with friends, or with Damien, than he did at home. It stung, but I chalked it up to teenage rebellion. I didn't realize he was already taking sides. One evening, Ella left her laptop open on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to snoop, but as I walked past, I saw an email from Damien. The subject line, "Don't forget the story." That stopped me dead in my tracks. I stood there, staring at the screen like an idiot. Every bone in my body screamed at me to close the laptop and pretend I didn't see it. But I couldn't. I clicked. The email was short, but it might as well have been a novel. "Make sure you stick to the chemo schedule we talked about. He's suspicious, and we can't afford him digging around." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands were shaking. For a moment, I thought I was going to throw up. What story? What chemo schedule? My wife was battling cancer, and Damien, the guy I trusted with everything, was talking about it like they were planning a play. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more. I needed to be sure. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. The PI was thorough. He started with Damien, tracking his movements and digging into his finances. It didn't take long to find the first red flag. Damien had made some big purchases recently, a new car, expensive watches, even a deposit on a vacation home. That might not have seemed strange, except Damien didn't make anywhere near enough money for that kind of lifestyle. His entire career was built on favors I'd handed him, and there was no way he could afford this on his own. And Ella? She wasn't going to any treatment centers. The PI followed her one afternoon when she said she had a chemo appointment. She drove to a day spa instead. A freaking spa. She spent hours there, laughing and chatting with the staff like she didn't have a care in the world. I sat there in my office, staring at the photos the PI sent me, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just Ella. Jackson was in on it too. The PI found texts between him and Damien, joking about how gullible I was. "He's such a sucker," one of them read. "We've got him wrapped around our finger." It hit me like a freight train. My own son. My wife. My best friend. They were all in on it. I wanted to storm home and confront them right then, but the PI stopped me. "You need to be smart about this," he said. "If you want to get them, you need evidence. Enough to leave no room for doubt." So I waited. I let them think I was still the clueless, devoted husband. But inside, I was burning alive. After the PI's findings, I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every moment with Ella and Damien felt like a performance I was forced to be a part of. Every time Jackson smirked at me, I wanted to scream at him. But I held it in. If I exploded too soon, I'd lose the upper hand. The first thing I did was quietly secure my finances. I wasn't about to let these people bleed me dry any longer. I met with my lawyer under the pretense of updating my will and began shifting assets into a trust they couldn't touch. I froze joint accounts Ella had access to, claiming it was a precaution against some recent identity theft cases. She barely blinked at the explanation, probably too confident in her little scheme to notice what I was doing. Damien was another story. He started asking odd questions about the business, how things were going, if we were hitting any rough patches. He'd never shown much interest before, and now he was suddenly acting like he cared? It was painfully obvious he was fishing for information. I played along, feeding him a mix of half-truths and red herrings. "Oh, things are fine," I'd say casually. "We had to liquidate a couple of assets to keep up with medical bills, but we'll bounce back." Every time I mentioned money, Damien's eyes lit up like a kid in a candy store. It was disgusting. Meanwhile, I worked with the PI to gather as much evidence as possible. We pulled phone records, intercepted emails, and even managed to get a recording of Damien bragging to someone at a bar about how easy it was to con me. He laughed about the money, calling it his early retirement fund. Ella, too, was slipping. She became careless, leaving receipts from her spa days in the trash and laughing off my questions about her treatments. I started asking to come with her to appointments, but she'd always find an excuse. "Babe, it's just a quick session. You don't need to waste your time," she'd say, kissing my cheek like she wasn't stabbing me in the back. I started keeping a journal of everything: dates, times, receipts, even their behaviors. I wanted a bulletproof case, something that would destroy any doubt about what they'd done. And I made sure to keep it all secure. Damien and Ella thought they were smart, but I wasn't about to let them outmaneuver me. The hardest part was pretending to still be the loving husband and father. Jackson, oblivious to my plans, kept pushing my buttons. He'd make snide remarks about how I was too soft, or how I needed to relax about the money Ella was spending. I wanted to tell him off so badly, but I kept my cool. One night, while we were watching TV, I casually mentioned, I was thinking of getting some additional insurance on the business. Just in case something happens to me. Ella perked up immediately. "Oh, that's a great idea, honey. You can't be too careful." Her enthusiasm nearly made me laugh. She probably thought I was setting up another safety net for her to drain. Little did she know, I was tightening the noose. Over the next few weeks, I put the final pieces of my plan into place. I scheduled a surprise family dinner with Damien, Ella, and Jackson, claiming it was to celebrate Ella's progress. What they didn't know was that the dinner wasn't about celebration. It was about confrontation. The night of the dinner, I felt strangely calm. Maybe it was because I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head, or maybe because I knew I was about to flip their world upside down. Either way, I played my part perfectly, laughing, smiling, and pretending like I wasn't seconds away from detonating the bomb. We gathered at our favorite upscale restaurant, one that Ella loved. Damien was late, of course, strolling in with his smug grin like he owned the place. Jackson was glued to his phone, barely looking up, while Ella was positively glowing, sipping her wine like everything was perfect. The conversation started innocently enough. We talked about mundane things: work, school, the latest gossip in Damien's social circle. I made sure to steer the conversation toward Ella's health. "So honey, how's the new treatment going?" I asked, swirling my glass of whiskey. Oh, it's going really well, she said, a bit too cheerfully. The doctors are optimistic. Really? That's great to hear, I replied. You'll have to give me the name of your oncologist. I'd love to send them a thank you gift for taking such good care of you. She froze, her smile faltering for just a second. Oh, they're really private about that sort of thing. You know how doctors are. I nodded slowly, pretending to buy it. Damien jumped in to steer the conversation away, talking about some real estate deal he was thinking about investing in. I let him ramble, all the while watching Ella fidget with her napkin. When the main course arrived, I leaned back in my chair, smiling at the three of them. You know, I said, I've been thinking a lot about family lately. About trust. About how much we rely on the people closest to us. Ella gave me a nervous smile. Damien raised an eyebrow, clearly not picking up on my tone. Jackson didn't even look up from his phone. And it's made me realize, I continued, that trust is the most valuable thing we have. Once it's broken, it's hard to put back together. Don't you agree, Damien? He looked up, startled. Yeah. Of course. Good, I said, locking eyes with him. Because tonight's about trust. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, dropping it on the table with a satisfying thud. Ella's eyes darted to it, then back to me. Damien's face paled, and Jackson finally looked up, his confusion evident. What's that? Ella asked, her voice trembling. Proof, I said simply. Proof of what you three have been doing behind my back. The silence was deafening. I opened the folder, spreading out photos, emails, and bank statements. One by one, I laid out the evidence, the spa trips, the texts between Damien and Jackson, the money funneled into Damien's accounts. I even had audio recordings of their conversations, thanks to a little help from the PI. Ella's face turned ghostly white. Eli, this isn't what it looks like. Damien tried to laugh it off. Come on, man, you're blowing this out of proportion. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Don't. Just don't. I know everything. The fake cancer, the stolen money, the lies. I know how you've been using me, mocking me, treating me like an idiot. And now? Now it's your turn to feel what it's like to lose everything. Ella started to cry, but I felt nothing. No pity, no sympathy. Jackson, on the other hand, looked furious. You're making a scene, he hissed. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I snapped. You chose to side with them. You helped them. And now, you'll face the consequences. I stood, throwing a pile of receipts onto the table. This is just the beginning. By the time I'm done, you'll all know exactly what betrayal costs. Ella tried to grab my arm, but I pulled away, looking down at her one last time. Enjoy your dinner, I said coldly. It's on me. After all, it might be the last nice thing you get for a long, long time. And with that, I walked out, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. Walking out of that restaurant felt like shedding dead weight. I was done pretending. I went straight to my lawyer's office, even though it was late. I had made arrangements beforehand, and by morning, every single thread tying me to Ella, Damien, and Jackson would start unraveling. The first step was the house. I'd bought it long before I married Ella, and it was solely in my name. By the time she woke up the next morning, the locks had been changed. A notice of eviction, signed by my lawyer, would be delivered to her. Damien? He'd soon find his cushy side business, built on the money he'd siphoned from me, collapsing under a mountain of lawsuits. But Jackson. That part hurt the most. I wasn't just cutting him off financially, I was cutting him out of my life. I left a letter for him at the house. It wasn't long. I just wrote, "You made your choice, son. And now I've made mine." I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how desperate people can get when they're cornered. Ella started calling nonstop, leaving voicemails full of apologies and excuses. Damien tried to spin everything as a misunderstanding. Jackson sent me an angry text blaming me for tearing the family apart. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I focused on moving forward. With the evidence I'd gathered, I began dismantling their lives piece by piece. Damien's fraud was exposed at his workplace, costing him his job. Ella's reputation as the brave cancer survivor crumbled when I leaked her spa receipts and fake medical records. And Jackson? I made sure every door to his privileged lifestyle was firmly closed. I wasn't just burning bridges, I was building a fortress around myself. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The fallout hit them harder than I imagined. Ella moved into a shabby motel after the eviction notice. She sent frantic emails begging me to talk this through. Her tone shifted from tearful apologies to bitter accusations, blaming me for overreacting and destroying everything we built. Each message was more desperate than the last, but I didn't reply. Damien, on the other hand, wasn't as quiet. He sent a lawyer after me, accusing me of defamation and interfering with his finances. It didn't matter. My lawyer and I were 10 steps ahead. Every accusation Damien tried to throw my way was countered with airtight evidence of his fraud and the money trail that led directly back to him. When his bank accounts were frozen pending investigation, he was livid. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Damien had been blacklisted in his industry. No one wanted to hire a man with a reputation for stealing from his best friend. Last I checked, he'd been selling his car and other valuables to cover legal fees. It was poetic justice. As for Jackson, he was forced to move back in with Ella. He texted me again, this time begging for a second chance. He wrote, "I didn't mean for it to go this far, Dad. Please, let's fix this." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. It wasn't about punishing them anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and ensuring they could never manipulate me again. The next phase of my plan involved going public. I had contacts in the media, and I made sure the story of Damien and Ella's betrayal reached the right ears. An anonymous source leaked the details, painting the picture of a con artist couple who faked a life-threatening illness for profit. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Ella's name was dragged through the mud. The sympathy she'd milked for months turned into outrage. Strangers online ripped her apart, calling her a monster and a gold digger. Damien wasn't spared either. But the public humiliation wasn't enough. I wanted them to feel the same isolation and helplessness they'd inflicted on me. And I wasn't finished yet. With their lives unraveling, I turned my focus inward. I wasn't just going to recover, I was going to rebuild bigger and better than before. The first step was rebranding my business. Damien had left a taint on my company's name by associating with me so closely, so I cut every visible tie and relaunched under a new name and vision. My team was loyal, and with their support, we worked tirelessly to expand. Within months, I signed contracts that doubled our revenue. It felt good to channel my anger into something constructive, something that couldn't be taken from me. In the meantime, Damien and Ella's lives continued to spiral. Damien tried to start a small business of his own, but his tarnished reputation followed him everywhere. Banks refused loans, and potential partners backed out as soon as they dug into his past. Ella, too, struggled. No one wanted to be associated with the woman who faked cancer. Her friends abandoned her, and she was forced to take a low-paying retail job just to survive. I thought Jackson might cut ties with them after seeing how low they'd sunk, but instead, he doubled down, blaming me for their suffering. He started posting online, spinning a sob story about how his cruel father had turned his back on his family. It didn't take long for me to find out, and when I did, I made sure his lies didn't gain traction. I contacted the moderators of the platforms he was using, showing them proof of the truth. His posts were taken down, and his accounts were flagged for spreading false information. I wasn't just repairing the damage they'd done, I was cementing my power. But this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about showing them, and the world, that I was unbreakable. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when the knock came at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it to see Jackson standing there, I froze. He looked different, disheveled, tired, and angrier than I'd ever seen him. "Dad," he started, his voice strained. "We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "There's nothing to talk about, Jackson. You made your choice." He flinched, but he didn't back down. "I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't know how far they'd gone, okay? I thought it was just money. I didn't know Mom lied about being sick." His words caught me off guard, but I didn't let it show. "And you still went along with it. You still mocked me with Damien. You still helped them. I thought," he hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I thought you'd get over it. That you'd forgive her, like you always do. I didn't think you'd destroy everything." The audacity of his words hit me like a slap. "Destroy everything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You mean the way you, your mother, and Damien destroyed me? Lied to me? Used me? Do you even realize what you've done? Jackson didn't have an answer. He just stood there, staring at the ground. For a moment, I thought I saw regret in his eyes, but it wasn't enough. You came here to make yourself feel better, I said coldly. But I'm not here to give you that. You're not a kid anymore, Jackson. You're old enough to know right from wrong, and you chose wrong. His shoulders sagged. So that's it? You're just done with me. I looked him in the eye, my voice steady. I'm done with anyone who betrays me. He left without another word. Watching him walk away should have hurt, but all I felt was relief. It was like cutting off the last chain tying me to that nightmare. After Jackson's visit, I knew I had finally closed the chapter on my old life. It wasn't easy to cut ties with my own son, but I had come to terms with the fact that loyalty was a two-way street. If he couldn't stand by me when I needed him most, then I couldn't allow him back into my life. With the past behind me, I poured all my energy into building a future worth living for. My business wasn't just thriving, it was dominating. New partnerships, new markets, and an entirely new image propelled me into the kind of success I once only dreamed of. Every contract signed felt like a small victory, a way to remind myself that I had survived, adapted, and come out stronger. On a personal level, I started traveling more. For years, I had been so focused on providing for my family that I forgot to live for myself. Now, I was free. I visited places I'd only seen in magazines, luxury retreats, bustling cities, serene countrysides. And I did it all on my terms. But the best part wasn't the freedom or even the success, it was the peace. For the first time in years, I could sleep soundly at night, knowing that no one was scheming behind my back. Ella, Damien, and Jackson faded further into the background as my life moved forward. Occasionally, I'd hear bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances. Damien was living paycheck to paycheck, constantly looking over his shoulder for the next lawsuit. Ella had relocated to a dingy apartment and was rumored to be struggling with debt. Jackson? I heard he moved out of Ella's place and was trying to make it on his own. It wasn't satisfaction I felt hearing about their struggles, just a quiet sense of closure. They were living with the consequences of their actions, and I was living proof that betrayal didn't have to define me. It happened on a rainy afternoon. I was at a cafe downtown, going over some paperwork. The place was quiet, the kind of spot where no one bothered you. I liked it for that reason. But as I was finishing my coffee, I felt someone's eyes on me. Looking up, I froze. Ella was standing a few tables away. She looked thinner, older, like life had taken its toll. Her once confident posture was slumped, and her expensive taste in clothing had been replaced by something plain and worn. She hesitated before approaching, her hands clutching the strap of her weathered purse. "Eli," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain outside. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my face neutral. "Ella, I didn't expect to see you here," she said, forcing a weak smile. "Neither did I," I replied, my tone cold but calm. There was an awkward silence before she sighed and sat down across from me. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." Her words didn't stir any emotion in me. "You're not sorry for what you did," I said bluntly. "You're sorry for where it got you." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. "I know I deserve that," she said. "But I need you to understand, I was desperate. I didn't think it would go this far." "Desperate?" I scoffed. "You lied about having cancer, Ella. You stole from me. You humiliated me. And you want me to believe it was desperation." She flinched but didn't argue. "You're right," she whispered. "I was selfish, and I ruined everything. But I've lost so much, Eli. Can't we at least talk? Just once?" I stared at her, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her sitting there with nothing. But another part of me, a smaller, quieter part, wondered if this was what closure looked like. "I don't owe you anything," I said finally, standing up and gathering my things. "Not a conversation, not forgiveness, and definitely not my time." Her tears spilled over, and she reached for my arm. "Please, Eli," she begged. "I just want a chance to explain." I pulled away, staring down at her with the same cold detachment I'd learned to embrace. "You had your chance, Ella. And you wasted it." Without another word, I walked out of the cafe, leaving her behind in the rain. After the encounter with Ella, I realized how much stronger I'd become. The old me might have entertained her pleas, searching for answers or closure. But the new me didn't need it. I had built a life that no longer revolved around her, Damien, or Jackson. And I was about to take things to the next level. A few weeks later, during a networking event, I met someone who would change the trajectory of my career. Her name was Victoria, a savvy, sharp, no-nonsense businesswoman who had made her name in global logistics. We hit it off immediately, bonding over shared values and an unapologetic drive for success. Victoria had been following my company's growth and saw potential in a collaboration. "Your business is dominating the domestic market," she said over dinner one evening. "But have you considered expanding globally? With my network, we could make it happen." It wasn't just her confidence that impressed me, it was her vision. She saw possibilities I hadn't even considered, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about the future. Within months, we partnered to launch an international branch of my business. The transition wasn't easy, but with Victoria's expertise and my determination, we quickly gained traction in Europe and Asia. Contracts poured in, and our combined efforts created a juggernaut that even my competitors couldn't ignore. Success, however, wasn't just about the money. It was about proving to myself, and the world, that I was unstoppable. Every time I signed a new deal or expanded into a new market, it felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I'd left behind. Of course, whispers of my success reached Damien, Ella, and Jackson. Mutual acquaintances told me Damien had tried, and failed, to launch a competing business. Ella, on the other hand, had started working as a receptionist for a small clinic. Jackson? I hadn't heard much, and I preferred it that way. But I wasn't focused on them anymore. Victoria and I had built something extraordinary, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own story. Just when I thought I had left my old life behind, a letter arrived at my office. The envelope was plain, with no return address, and my assistant handed it to me without a second thought. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "You may have moved on, but some wounds don't heal. You can't erase us, Eli. Damien." I couldn't help but laugh. It was pathetic, really, a desperate attempt to claw at me from the ruins of his life. But it also left me uneasy. Damien wasn't one to let things go, and the letter felt more like a warning than a plea. A week later, my suspicion was confirmed. One of my business partners mentioned receiving an anonymous email accusing me of unethical practices. The claims were baseless, of course, but it was clear who had sent it. Damien was trying to sabotage my reputation, likely as some twisted form of revenge. I didn't panic. Instead, I called my legal team and my PR specialist, laying out the facts and preparing for any fallout. It turned out that Damien had been sloppy, leaving a digital trail that was easy to trace back to him. The moment we had the proof, I made my move. My lawyer sent him a cease and desist letter, warning him that any further attempts to defame me would result in immediate legal action. A mutual acquaintance later told me Damien was furious, but he had no choice but to back off. Still, the incident reminded me that the past had a way of lingering, even when you thought it was buried. It was a small bump in the road, but it reaffirmed my resolve to keep moving forward. As for Ella and Jackson, they stayed quiet. I hadn't heard from either of them since my encounter with Ella at the cafe, and I preferred it that way. My world was bigger than them now, and I wasn't about to let their ghosts haunt me. After the incident with Damien, I realized something. As much as I had moved on, my past would always linger at the edges. But instead of letting it pull me down, I decided to use it as fuel. If I was going to deal with the scars they left, I would turn those scars into a testament of resilience, a symbol of how far I'd come. Victoria and I continued expanding our global operations, and within 2 years, our business wasn't just thriving, it was dominating industries we never thought we'd enter. From tech to logistics to real estate, we built an empire that felt unstoppable. Our partnership became the talk of the corporate world, with articles praising our innovative strategies and relentless drive. But as much as I loved the work, I knew there was more to life than success. I didn't want my legacy to just be about money or power. I wanted it to mean something. So I started giving back. I established a foundation aimed at helping families dealing with real medical crises, families like the one I thought I had. We funded treatments, provided housing for out-of-town patients, and even supported cancer research. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it felt good to turn something that had been used to manipulate me into a force for good. It was during one of the Foundation's events that I saw Jackson again. I hadn't heard from him in over a year, and seeing him in the crowd caught me off guard. He looked nervous, unsure if he should approach me. I wasn't sure either, but I decided to let him. "Dad," he said softly, standing just a few feet away. "I didn't know if you'd even let me get close." I studied him for a moment, trying to read his intentions. He looked older, more humbled than I remembered. "What do you want, Jackson?" I asked, my tone neutral. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," he said. "For everything. For what I did, what I said. I didn't understand how much I hurt you. And by the time I did, I thought it was too late to fix it." His words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had written him off as another betrayer, someone who had chosen greed over loyalty. But standing there, I saw a version of him I hadn't seen before, someone who wasn't just asking for forgiveness, but someone who had finally grown up. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said honestly. "What you did broke something I don't think can ever be repaired." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I understand. I wanted you to know that I regret it. Every day." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I sighed. "Regret is a start. But if you want anything from me, you'll have to earn it." Jackson looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I will," he said firmly. "I promise." We left it at that. No grand reconciliation, no emotional reunion, just a glimmer of possibility. I wasn't ready to let him back into my life fully, but maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. After the event, Victoria pulled me aside. "That was your son, wasn't it?" she asked, her tone gentle. "Yeah," I admitted. "Do you think you'll forgive him?" I didn't have an answer. "I guess time will tell," I said. As the months passed, I continued to focus on the legacy I was building. The foundation grew, helping more people than I could have imagined. My empire expanded, securing its place as a global powerhouse. And while the ghosts of my past still lingered, they felt smaller, less significant. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly in control, not just of my business, but of my life. Life was finally falling into place. The business empire I had built with Victoria was flourishing, and our foundation was making a real difference. I had reached a point where the pain of betrayal felt like a distant memory. But as I should have learned by now, the past has a way of sneaking back when you least expect it. It began with an email. Late one night, as I was reviewing reports, I noticed a message flagged as urgent. The subject line simply read, "You need to see this." I almost ignored it, assuming it was another spam message, but curiosity got the better of me. The email contained a series of attachments and a message. "I think you should know the truth about Damien and Ella. They've been hiding something that might change how you see everything. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this. Anonyma." My heart sank as I opened the first attachment. It was a scanned document, a birth certificate. The father's name was left blank, but the mother's name was clear, Ella Montgomery. The child's name, though, wasn't Jackson. It was someone I'd never heard of. The next document was an adoption record, followed by a series of messages between Damien and Ella. Their tone was casual, almost flippant, discussing payments and a shared secret. One message from Ella to Damien stood out. "I told him the baby died. He'll never know." It felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. They'd had a child together, a child she hid from me while we were married. And worse, Damien had known all along. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind raced back to the early years of my marriage, when Ella and I had been trying to start a family. I remembered her telling me, through tears, that she'd had a miscarriage. I had held her, comforted her, mourned with her. It had all been a lie. I spent the rest of the night going through the documents and messages, piecing together a story that felt too cruel to be true. The child had been born during the early years of my marriage to Ella, just before Jackson was born. To avoid suspicion, Ella and Damien had arranged for the baby to be adopted, cutting all ties but keeping it a secret from me. By morning, I had no doubt the information was legitimate. The final attachment was a current photo of the child, now a teenager. He had Damien's sharp features and Ella's unmistakable smile. I didn't know what to do with this new information. Part of me wanted to confront them, to unleash my anger and demand answers. But another part of me, wiser, calmer, knew that nothing they could say would make it better. Instead, I made a decision. I contacted my legal team and had them look into the child's whereabouts. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to accomplish. Maybe closure, or maybe a chance to help someone who had been another victim of Damien and Ella's lies. A few weeks later, I found out the boy, named Lucas, was living with a foster family after the adoption had fallen apart years earlier. He had bounced from home to home, never finding stability. That broke something in me. As much as I hated Damien and Ella, this boy wasn't to blame for their sins. I reached out to the foster family anonymously, offering financial support for Lucas's education and well-being. I didn't reveal who I was, and I had no intention of contacting Lucas directly, at least not yet. It wasn't about claiming him as my own. It was about ensuring he had a future, free from the shadow of his parents' mistakes. Meanwhile, I learned that Damien and Ella had reconnected. They had been spotted together at a diner in a neighboring town, arguing loudly. Apparently, Damien had fallen on such hard times that he turned to Ella for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. Two people who had conspired to ruin my life now clinging to each other in their mutual misery. As for Jackson, he surprised me. Slowly but surely, he started to make amends. He reached out regularly, not to ask for money or forgiveness, but simply to update me on his life. He had gotten a job and was trying to rebuild on his own. Over time, my anger softened, and while our relationship would never be the same, there was a sense of cautious hope. This latest twist reminded me that betrayal doesn't always come with a clean ending. There are layers, hidden truths, and consequences that ripple outward. But it also showed me that I could rise above it all, choosing not to be defined by the damage others tried to inflict. It's been 3 years since my world shattered and began to rebuild, and in that time, I've come to understand more about myself, about betrayal, and about what it means to truly rise above the ashes of the life you thought you knew. People talk about closure like it's a door you can shut, but I've learned it's more like a window you learn to look out of differently. You don't forget what's outside, but the view changes, and so do you. The business, which once felt like my whole world, has become something much bigger than I ever dreamed. It's not just a source of pride, it's a testament to resilience. With Victoria as my partner, we've built a global empire, breaking into markets we once thought impossible. We've expanded into cutting-edge technology, eco-friendly innovations, and even education initiatives to mentor the next generation of leaders. The foundation, though, is where I've truly found a sense of purpose. At first, it was just a way to turn my pain into something positive, but it has grown into one of the largest charities in its field. We've helped thousands of families who are truly battling the hardships I was tricked into believing Ella faced. Every time I meet one of those families, I'm reminded of why I do this, because helping others succeed is the best way to heal. But the most unexpected part of this journey has been the people who have re-entered my life, starting with Jackson. When Jackson first showed up at the Foundation's event, I wasn't sure what to think. Seeing him again stirred up a mix of emotions: anger, hurt, and a cautious flicker of hope. When he apologized, I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't just forget the choices he made. It took months of small, consistent steps for him to show me that he wasn't the same person who had stood by Damien and mocked me. He started calling regularly, not to ask for forgiveness, but just to talk. At first, it was awkward, but over time, our conversations grew more natural. He told me about the job he'd gotten, the tiny apartment he was so proud of, and the mistakes he'd made that he was working to fix. Slowly, he was becoming someone I could respect, even admire. One night, during one of our dinners, he asked me something that caught me off guard. "Dad, do you think you'll ever trust me again?" It wasn't an easy question to answer. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it takes more than an apology to rebuild. But looking at Jackson, I saw a man who was genuinely trying, and that mattered. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But you're doing the right things. Keep going." That dinner felt like a turning point. Since then, our relationship has been slowly mending, not to what it was before, but to something different, something built on hard-earned understanding. Then there was Lucas. Discovering the truth about him was one of the hardest parts of this journey. Learning that Ella and Damien had a child, hidden from me, was a betrayal I never saw coming. At first, I didn't know how to handle it, but I realized Lucas was innocent in all of it. He didn't choose to be born into their web of lies. The support I provided for him was always meant to be anonymous, but when I received his letter, I felt something I hadn't expected: pride. Knowing that he was using the opportunities I'd given him to make something of himself, to help others, felt like a victory, not just for him, but for me as well. The letter read, "I don't know who you are, but you've changed my life. I'm in college now, studying to become a social worker to help kids like me. Thank you for believing in me, even when no one else did." I read it a dozen times, and every time, it hit me differently. Lucas didn't need to know my name to know the impact I'd had on his life. And maybe one day, when the time is right, I'll meet him. But for now, I'm content knowing he's on a path of his own, far removed from the shadows of Damien and Ella. As for them, I hear bits and pieces occasionally. Damien's attempts to regain his footing in the business world have failed miserably. His reputation is in ruins, and his name is a punchline in circles where he was once respected. Ella has fared no better. The sympathy she once milked has dried up, and she's been reduced to living with her sister, working small jobs to get by. Do I feel satisfaction in their downfall? Maybe at first, I did. But now, it just feels like a natural consequence of their choices. They made their bed, and they're lying in it. I no longer let their existence take up space in my mind. What I've learned through all of this is that life doesn't hand you closure neatly wrapped in a bow. You have to create it yourself. Revenge might feel good in the moment, but it's what you build afterward that defines you. For me, it was about creating a life that no one could destroy, a life filled with purpose, strength, and the kind of success that speaks for itself. Now, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who has been through hell and come out stronger. I see someone who took the worst kind of betrayal and turned it into a story of resilience. And I see someone who has finally found peace, not because of revenge, but because of growth. If you've ever been betrayed, let me leave you with this: your pain doesn't have to define you. People will hurt you, use you, and lie to you, but they can't take your strength unless you let them. Build your life, reclaim your power, and remember that the best revenge is living well. This is my story. It's not perfect, but it's mine. And that's enough. Years later, as I sit in my office overlooking the city skyline, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the revenge, they all seem like distant memories now, echoes of a life that feels almost foreign. Yet, every choice, every hardship, every scar shaped the man I've become. The business is no longer just my legacy, it's become a beacon of innovation and opportunity for countless people around the world. Victoria and I remain partners, not just in work but in purpose. Together, we've taken on challenges that seemed insurmountable, and with each success, I found a renewed sense of meaning.